So, you're ready to break free from the lecture hall lullaby that you're so used to delivering in your secondary science classroom.
Oh, yeah!
Maybe you teach biology, chemistry, physics, earth science, maybe some level of middle school science, maybe an elective, and you became a science teacher so that you could have some of this inspiration, this excitement about the natural and physical world shake off onto our next generation. But you have found more than a few problems in trying to or thinking about how to try to do this. Maybe one of them was the fact that our testing system doesn't test wonder. It doesn't test excitement. It doesn't test inspiration. Frankly, it doesn't test skills. And you likely need your students to pass a qualifying exam maybe at the end of the year or maybe sometime in their high school. I know I live in Pennsylvania and our qualifying exam in high school is biology. Students must pass that biology test. And so you're concerned that if you're going to be giving them activities every day to learn through and they're not connecting the dots, it's going to be a real problem. The other thing you might have noticed is that schools aren't super rich. Not all of them. Maybe you live in a very rural school or a very urban school. Or maybe you're in a cyber school like me and you feel like for whatever reason, maybe it's the finances or the actual model of your school, you don't have access to what you think of as science instruction. Physical tools for a wet lab, for an investigation with real hands every day. Maybe every time you have tried this, you have found that the students can't focus, don't focus, because you're only one person and you've got a classroom of 30 or 40. So you might team them up and then they get having side chatter about all sorts of things. You give them a computer and they're visiting locations they shouldn't be listening, and you're not making any progress anyway because the students are just like, oh, okay, we'll get there eventually. And then, of course, after trying all that, you are burned out. I mean, you're like, I still really want to try this, but maybe next year, maybe in September. Well, I got you. If any of those things are reasons for or experiences that seem very real, in this video, I'm going to share with you my lesson plan template for secondary science teachers to make instruction interactive and very inquiry-based, but keeping in mind all of those challenges I just cited there. Using it, you will be able to encourage your students to uncover core ideas for themselves, using a central component of the lesson, which is a learning experience, not a lecture. This lesson plan template is going to ensure alignment and assessment goals. So you don't have to worry about, am I giving this activity? Is it going to connect the dots? Because you're going to make sure that it connects the dots. We're going to always have that standardized assessment-based success criteria woven into the lesson. And you don't need to worry about spending a whole bunch of money on dollar store doodads like physics just so that your students touch something, because science doesn't have to be that way. If we're using science and engineering practices, it's about the science and engineering practices. It's not necessarily about the tools you're using. And I exclusively rely on free web-based resources to get that job done, whether they are student-controlled simulations or tutorials or just videos that I have students do specific things with beyond watch them, or even texts. This lesson plan template is so focused on student ownership to get through the lesson, to uncover those core ideas, that you're going to find behavior problems become minimum. They become nil to none. And because of that, you are no longer going to have to be the constant source of authority, knowledge authority. You are the gatekeeper of all the information, or constantly with the behavior stuff, because they're going to have to focus to get the job done every day in class. So your classroom, it's going to manage itself. And I'm sharing this with you because year after year, for at least maybe the last 5 or 6 years. This lesson planning template and this framework has allowed me to see increased student engagement in my classroom because they can't do class without it. If they don't participate, they're not going to get it. Performance is going to be directly connected to engagement. And because engagement requires doing science, making observations, asking questions in a metacognitive way, in a partnership way, in a to the teacher way, in an all sorts of way, asking questions, making inferences, analyzing data, communicating with peers, that's all science. In doing that, the rigor of your content is going to naturally increase because there is no rigor involved in just pretending like you're absorbing someone's words into your brain or ferociously, frantically copying down the words that someone's saying and taking notes. And because the rigor increases based on activity, differentiation becomes all of a sudden doable. Whereas before you might have been like, how am I supposed to differentiate content and process and product? Because all you were doing was lecturing. And then finally, what we really need our students to do, what we've always needed our students to do, but what we really need now is a growth mindset. And we don't need to preach to them about it. We don't need a lecture on that either. We just need to provide a space for students to experiment, to do science, to learn that more often than not, scientists are wrong than they are right. But lucky for them, they have a supportive, nurturing teacher there to help guide them through. They have peers around them that are willing to exchange ideas. And all of that positive mindset, that will propel achievement. Hi, I'm Lisa. I started Lab in Every Lesson because I felt that I wasn't supported or shepherded toward the kind of science instruction that I always wanted to provide. And when I did my self-study on it on purpose, I just never got to a source that specifically outlined for me how to do it. It was a dream, it was an imagination. I wanted to instill skills in students. Are they going to be able to make sound decisions at the end of the day? Is any of the school experience designed to do that? I feel like science is. I feel like science is the best suited to help students make sound decisions by helping guide them through something that they already do, but calling their attention to it in a way that allows them to be aware of it and focus on it and have consistent practice every day so that these skills are really and truly learned. Before we dive deep into all the details of this lesson plan template designed for secondary science teachers to create more interactive science lessons for their students, I want you to know that you can get this exact lesson plan. And not just the lesson plan, but also a how-to guide, stepwise how-to guide, and an example of it completely filled out. Now, I realize you might not print this and write it, but having the visual guide and some of these visual prompts is going to help you even when you're pounding out on your keyboard in a cloud-based document somewhere. Just go to labinEveryLesson.com/lesson-plan-template. Yeah, lesson-plan-template. Lesson plan template. Not only will I send you that, I'm also going to include in it a weekly student activity tracker because this is a lesson plan template where an activity is the beating heart of the entire thing. It completely replaces your lecture. So as a matter of not just keeping attendance, but also marking off every single day your thoughts and feelings on student mastery or struggle might help you reveal some patterns yourself in data and things that are going on in your classroom. You know, data-informed instruction. Simple tools can help get you there. I have found myself recently doing a super deep dive into my chemistry lessons, and you can find them in a playlist here on my channel. In each of those videos, I try to give a nod to this framework. So I've decided to just go ahead and make a video exclusively all about the framework. We're going to start here with the objectives. Objectives, we want to make them learning intentions and success criteria, not just today you will fill in the blank, but actually to separate the what and the why from the how. So our learning intentions are going to give students the what and the why, and usually we're framing those learning intentions around the standard. Whether you're using NGSS or some state adaptation or just plain old state standards, there is something around which you're structuring this lesson, and it's likely not just going to be because it's the next page in the textbook. Now, your learning intentions might go further than that. You might be, as I do in chemistry, teaching something on Monday so that they better understand something on Friday. And so this is a really unique place for us in our lessons to set the stage for not only what is and why, but also what's to come. The success criteria, however, really are going to focus on the how they are going to achieve those things. And what are they going to do to achieve those things? So a lot of times I'm going to start my lesson planning and I'm going to set out the learning intentions, but I may not come back and actually populate my success criteria until I have planned the lesson. Because the success criteria are going to usually take two forms. We're going to have activity-based success criteria, what they're doing in class to uncover the core ideas. This is usually going to be heavily based on observation and analysis, maybe even collaboration. But also it's going to include skill-based or assessment-based success criteria. Remember, we need our students to pass tests, not just our tests, but maybe bigger stakes state assessments that represent our schools. And so we definitely need to include that. We got to make it come full circle. So you might be most familiar with those when you're planning your lessons. You know what students are going to have to be able to do on a test. And so maybe you can start there. But definitely the thing that's going to allow you to loosen your lecture stronghold is the incorporation of science concepts. The big idea here in objectives is no longer all about what you're teaching for the day. It's no longer about the topic or the page in the textbook. It's an entire experience you're outlining for them. Now, the next piece we're going to talk about is that warm-up activity. You might call it a bell ringer or an icebreaker or warm-up. I call it review and preview because it really needs to do two things. It is the before instruction part of this lesson plan template, and it needs to both activate prior knowledge. It needs to be a worthy time spent in your classroom for students to go back to what they already know, connect some piece of what they've already learned. And truly, this could be academic in nature, or this could just be life experience in nature, because that's the fact of true learning. Whenever we create new knowledge, we're adding something new that we've learned to some prior experience or some prior memory or some prior thing learned to create something new. And so here it's really important that we're tying into something they did the day before, the week before, the month before, the quarter before, the semester before, however it works. And that it's integrating. And what's the difference here between activating and integrating? You can say, well, the word integrate just kind of means slipped in. It's part of, it's kind of woven into. Yes, what I want this review and preview to do is actually connect to something that they know from back here, to something they're going to do in the lesson. Sometimes my review and preview, honestly, contains the lesson. Here on my channel, when I'm doing a deep dive into all my chemistry lessons, I am showcasing the details of all of these reviews and previews. So if you're not quite sure what I mean by activate and integrate, you can study up on any of the videos. In my current playlist at the time I'm recording this is all about periodic patterns and electrons, but there's more to come. So just check out my playlist tab for more. The beating heart of this lesson plan template, of this student-centered, inquiry-based, three-dimensional, all the adjectives approach is a student-centered learning activity. This is your during instruction moment. So fundamentally, you can see in the template here, we're breaking it down into before, during, and after. And so your during instruction is wholly on them. Now, your work has gone into developing, designing, preparing this activity for the students, but class time, delivery is spent them working it. And so some visual cues I have for you here are how you might break this down: whole group, small group, individual, based on, honestly, differentiation. Do you need your students to go through all the steps for multiple observation subjects? Is that really necessary? When I teach on differentiation, I teach that we can have them do a lot of things or little things. Just the act of doing is something that we can adjust. And then there is the y-axis, the critical thinking axis. Do we need them think really deeply and hard, connect the dots all themselves? Or are we going to provide a lot more support and guidance in that respect? So honestly, just thinking about how you might ahead of time plan to deliver this and have them execute it is an important piece. But this student-centered learning activity is always going to be, for me, driven by technology. Now, I'm not going to say a whole lot more here because I've done a whole video on ed tech tools. And in that video on ed tech tools, I'm talking all about sourcing your free technology online because it's abounding. Your school does not have to have an expensive license paid for with one of these fancy simulation companies. You just search your topic and you get what you need. So right here, I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and watch my video on ed tech tools. It's super long, 45 minutes. It's like a qualifying PD. And from that video, you can also get a download, a whole guidebook. I think I call it Ed Tech Essentials. In fact, I'll leave that link in the description below as well. The fourth part of our 5-part lesson plan template / framework is data analysis. This is also a during instruction piece, and truly, I'm going to say the learning activity and the data analysis, they go hand in hand. In fact, I will soon prepare a video, if it's not already posted, on the truth that you can take your most thorough lab activity and condense it into a 1-page artifact outline that you can deliver in a class period. But the key here on the data analysis is to craft an artifact outline. Okay, it's a fancy word for maybe worksheet. It's a 1-pager. That's the key, where students are recording their observations, and maybe in recording their observations as part of the learning activity, maybe even the prompts, not super detailed and definitely not hand-holding through the entire thing. Some of the prompts may be incorporated into that artifact outline, but it's dominating with their observations and structured by us in advance in a way that allows it at the end to be, step back, look at what we have and see some of our cross-cutting concepts. What are the patterns that we can see emerge? What are some of the trends in our observations we've made? Is there any cause and effect piece at work? How are the parts of the system we're studying or the parts of the model interconnected? What are the relationships between energy and matter? All this is really where the cross-cutting concepts come through. So science and engineering practices in the learning activity, and though it is a science and engineering practice itself, in the data analysis portion of this lesson plan template, this is where cross-cutting concepts come through. And this is where you're doing most of your work in delivery as a teacher. Because by this point, all of the bugs in the execution have been worked out and you're helping students understand. This is where the critical thinking really comes alive. This is where students are uncovering core ideas. So you could see that bullet point item there that says uncovers core ideas and uncovers cross-cutting concepts. Now, if you're really unsure or unsteady, or you just want to learn more about how you can have your students uncover the cross-cutting concepts, I have a video on that. I would encourage you to watch it. And I really, when I stepped out here on YouTube to deliver some ideas, I did not start out be the NGSS girl. That was not my goal. Because I realized everybody's not using that. People teaching in private schools, people teaching, in all kinds of models that aren't necessarily even determined by state standards, might be trying to do this thing. And all we really need to focus on is letting the act and practice of science shine through. And it just is true, though, that cross-cutting concepts make that a reality. So even if you don't have to abide by them, it's still really a great place for us to focus in our planning. And surely you might have to sit down with your content for quite a bit of time and think about, what do I want them to see? What does need to emerge, so that you can find the right technology tool and you can craft the right artifact outline to make that happen. In terms of uncovering core ideas, if your mind is just blown right now and you're feeling like not a thing, I don't know how to make that happen, I actually have a freebie guide on uncovering core ideas. I'll leave that also in the link in the description below. This video here is packed with good stuff. The final piece of the framework is skill practice. And we would consider this an after instruction piece, where we are done. We set the stage, we let them explore, we clarified for them at the end of data analysis exactly what they should have seen, what they did see. We pointed to evidence, we shared reasoning, we got students to teach each other. And now we have to make sure that all that work we did will translate to achievement on assessments. And so this is where you're including maybe some multiple choice questions, maybe an exit ticket that's kind of detailed, maybe just a simple exit ticket. Maybe for all you need for a formative assessment is the one answer to one question. For me, I usually go anywhere from 2 to 5 practice opportunities so I can correct and redirect as necessary. The final piece of this lesson plan template that I want to point out that I haven't mentioned yet, and you're probably like, where does this come from? How is she doing it? Is the elements of disciplinary literacy. Now, there was one year that my school focused really hard on literacy, and we kind of still are across the board, but we had to do text-dependent analysis with our students. I was like, my eyes were getting stuck back here because massive eye roll, right? Bruh. But I learned a lot that year. You got to keep an open mind as teachers, right? I learned a lot that year. Disciplinary literacy isn't so much about learning to read and comprehending all we're reading like it is in many other reading-focused content areas. In science, disciplinary literacy is about interpretation and communication as much as it is reading and writing. So if you see disciplinary literacy and you're just thinking reading, writing, it's so much more than that. And so I'm going to give you a sneak peek right here of a sample lesson plan template completely filled out, where I've given you some prompts and some nods to the elements of disciplinary literacy and where they might show up in these various aspects of a lesson that you design using this template. First up is in your warm-up activity. When you are activating and integrating that prior knowledge, you can be throwing in some terminology, some key terms they have used before, or asking them to anticipate and connect to the meaning of keywords you know that they're going to be using in the context of your lesson. In the activity portion, the active learning part of this lesson, your students are going to be carrying out multi-step procedures and translating information expressed visually into words. Both of these are expressed in the Common Core standards related to literacy, that we can not only understand what's happening from words and their specific combination, but also through diagrams and models and pictures and flowcharts and diagrams. Additionally, our data analysis and analyzing relationships among the various ideas that we're presenting or observing becomes part of literacy as well. And conducting short research projects, which I'm going to kind of challenge you that if you're developing a lesson with this lesson plan template, you're creating mini labs every single day if you're applying it every single day, like I do. And so this idea of conducting short research projects to answer a question, that lives in literacy. And then if you're doing this, it also lives in your classroom. So it's in that activity and data analysis part. And even when you're wrapping up the lesson, even when you're doing formative assessment, skill practice, your students are maybe recalling, interpreting, applying, the various skills of the taxonomy, determining the meaning of keywords and phrases. Don't forget to download this exact template at labandeverylesson.com/lesson-plan-template to get your copy and learn how you can do some really unique professional development in a very short amount of time to craft that beating heart of this lesson, that interactive, student-centered learning activity, and that one-page artifact outline.